I am so excited to be making this video because when I thought about studying literature, all I wanted to know was, what do literature students actually have to read? Which books are deemed worthy of being taught at university? How much do you have to read? Which kinds of texts? And I remember watching Emmy's video about everything she had to read in her first year as a literature student, and I just love that. It gave me so much motivation and just got me so excited about studying. So I want to talk about that today as well. I have studied for 4 weeks at this point at the University of Vienna. I do comparative literature or European literature, so that's mostly what you're gonna see here. I say I spend about 2 to 3 hours every day just reading for uni, which is a lot to me. I wasn't used to reading this much. I also didn't have the time to read this much. So yeah, it's great. I very rarely have to read entire books. It's most of the time excerpts that my teachers put on our learning platform. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say for now. Yeah, I mean, obviously, last thing I want to say is that what you have to read obviously really depends on the courses you choose. I'm gonna tell you about the 6 courses I'm taking at the moment. So if you want to skip to any part, there's timestamps in the description below. 3 of my courses I absolutely have to take. They're the introduction course on literature and on comparative literature and the literary research thing, and then the other ones I chose. So yeah, let's get into it. Oh yeah, and if you want to know about just my overall experience of going back to university, I've uploaded a video about that last week. I'll link it somewhere up here. You know, that's a more general impression of how I'm doing there. So this is the Beast, my folder on where I try to sort everything that I need. I really prefer printing everything because I don't like reading on the laptop at all. But my printer is getting a little bit out of breath, I have to say. So as I said, my first class is an introductory course on comparative literature, and in the first lesson our teacher told us that we have to read Don Quixote. We don't have to read it all. We have to read like 14 or so chapters, I think, until about here. So that's not too bad at all. I've done that by now. He did say, though, you know, you should really read this. If you're a literature student, you have to have read Don Quixote. So I'm planning on keeping up with it. But since our first exam is already in 4 weeks, it would be a bit much to read the entire thing. I'm pretty glad I don't have to do that. Yeah, so that's the first one we're gonna have to read, and then and then also this book called Zeige, deine Klasse from Dröscher. This is a contemporary piece, a woman growing up in Germany who decides to, you know, then go study literature at university, and my teacher just thought that would be a nice story for us to relate to. It's like 200 something pages and I'm about halfway through. It's okay, it's nice. I enjoy the discussions on privilege and things like that. I don't think it's a book I would necessarily recommend to anyone though. Yeah, and then we have one more book we had to read in class. We were talking about Rezeptionsgeschichte, so how works of literature are received and how that can differ throughout the years, basically. And we had to read Address Unknown. I have it printed here. By Catherine Kressmann. And it's a really short book. Like, you can really read it in less than an hour. It's just a letter correspondence between two friends during the 1930s, and one man is Jewish and he lives in America, and the other man goes back to Germany and very quickly gets indoctrinated with Hitler's ideas, basically. And it shows how quickly his mentality towards his Jewish friend changes. There's also a major plot twist at the end. I really enjoyed reading it. It really hit me quite hard, and I've actually ordered the book. It hasn't arrived yet, but I can really recommend just reading those few letters. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and read you a little bit from it. As for the stern measures that so distress you, I myself did not like them at first, but I have come to see their painful necessity. The Jewish race is a sore spot to any nation that harbors it. I have never hated the individual Jew. Yourself I have always cherished as a friend, but you will know that I speak in all honesty when I say I have loved you not because of your race, but in spite of it. Yeah, so heavy stuff, but one of my favorite texts I had to read so far, and we had to write a little page or so essay about how it was received and when it was translated and things like that. And the last text we had to read for this course was by Genette, and it's called Palimpseste. Palimpseste. I don't really know how to pronounce that correctly, but if I'm remembering correctly, that is like a material people used to write on. I think it was like cow leather or something like that. And every time when you removed a page or like a bit of text, you could write on it again, but you would still see the imprints of the text that came before on it. And that is a very beautiful name for what he's trying to explain in this book on intertextuality, that basically every text is in a way built on the texts that came before it, right? Maybe they allude to them, maybe they directly quote them, maybe they're influenced by them. I think that gives you an idea. So he talks about, for example, how Virgil and James Joyce both based their text on Homer, right? Ulysses is based on the Odyssey, and things like that. We had to read like the introduction and first chapter. I think that's probably like, 20 pages or so. Okay, the next course is called Provocative Spirit, the Classics of Literature and Their Controversies. And I think this is my second favorite course. It's really interesting. We started by reading Plato's Republic, and we started with his, argument that in his ideal state he would throw all poets and writers out because literature doesn't tell the truth and it's tempting the youth and things like that. His argument is more nuanced, and there's something to say for it, but it perfectly displays the ancient war between philosophy and seeking truth and literature, which is just falsehood, right? He so famously said that all poets lie. So we read basically excerpts from all 10 or 11 books of the Republic that deal with writing in some way. I really enjoyed that because I feel like it's so relevant still. Because I felt like it's so relevant still today. And I just found it interesting how he said that, in Homer's stories, the gods have flaws, and that it's not good to show that to our youth because young people have to be brave, and they're not allowed to be afraid of death or to have longings, for worldly pleasures or anything like that. And then we also read Aristotle's answer to that in his Poetics. And this work has come up so much by now in different courses as well that I just decided to buy it. So this is the Oxford World Classics edition of Aristotle's Poetics, and it's very nice. It has a really good introduction, and it also quotes Plato's Republic on the main points that I've just mentioned, and then it goes into Aristotle's answer. And the way we have genres now in literature, especially in German-speaking parts of the world, is very much based on Aristotle. So I just thought this is an important work. I'm just gonna get it. It's not easy to read, but it's small and it's doable. So yeah, very much enjoyed that. Oh yeah, I'll read you a little quote. So Plato said, "Homer's battles of gods, all this is inadmissible. Whether it was composed allegorically or not, young people can't distinguish the allegorical from the non-allegorical, and what enters the mind at the age tends to become indelible and irremovable." Yeah, and then basically Aristotle says that no, literature has a cathartic effect, right? And in small doses, that's good. And it also connects us to the possibility of what history could be or what humans could be like. And yeah, I very much feel in agreement with Aristotle on that. But let's move on. A little bit later in the course, we started talking about Freud and his love and appreciation for literature. He thought that the greatest work of literature that have ever been written is the Oedipus myth, the Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky, and Hamlet by Shakespeare, because he says they all deal with that father conflict. But yeah, he based many of his theories actually on what he read in literature, and he confirmed them this way, maybe. And he also said that literature is the perfect medium to see what a society is suppressing at the moment, which I thought was interesting. And so we just read like an array of his letters and parts of his books and things like that. We read what he wrote about Dostoevsky, right? How he thinks that he's a great writer, but he's a moral failure, basically, because he gave in to his neurosis and his gambling addiction and was pretty mean to his wife, and that he never managed to get out of that circle of neurosis. And Freud basically thinks that art speaks to us because it responds or corresponds to something in our subconscious, right? And that's why we feel so drawn to it. Really cool. We also talked about how Wittgenstein really did not like Freud. And was it Wittgenstein? Oh my god, what am I saying? Yes, it was Wittgenstein. And how that ancient fight between philosophy and literature came up there once again. I think the most we've read from a book called Totem and Taboo, where he talks about where he thinks the taboos in our society come from and how they have kind of evolved through human history. So yeah, that was interesting. Very much enjoyed that. The last book we read on that course was a book by Pierre Bayard called How to Talk About Books You Haven't Read, or in the original French, Comment parler des livres qu'on n'a pas lus. and it's about exactly that, and that struggle that especially when you're teaching about literature, or if you're a student, you're constantly confronted with this dilemma of having to talk about books that you probably haven't actually read. And he takes kind of the shame out of that and says that the line between reading and not reading is actually pretty thin, because maybe you know a book better that you have just skimmed than a book you've read 15 years ago, like you can't really draw the line there. And he even says that sometimes you can talk better about books if you haven't actually read them, and interesting things like that. I thought it was lovely that our professor wanted to give us this advice early on, because he said that, when he studied comparative literature, at the beginning of their studies, they got this like list of works they should read during their studies. And it was just like, I don't know, 50 pages printed front and back with, everything. And then it would just say Proust, complete works, Shakespeare, complete works, Dante, complete works, right? And he said it was so demotivating for him, because you could never, ever get around to do that anyways. And that, we shouldn't feel discouraged if we haven't read something. So, lovely. I'll read you a little bit of it. Oh no, I can't. It's in German. Do I? Is it? No, I think. So is it? Yeah, no, it's English. So in terms of which languages we read in, I think, it depends a bit on which language the course is in. I think most of my courses are in German, but then sometimes the books are in English and we're expected to be able to read that. And often they also put it up in the original language. So in my course about colonialism, I really enjoy being able to read Dutch again. But this originally French book, which we talked about in German, I read in English. So there you go. It often also depends on which copy the teacher has at home and can scan for us. So he says, the effect of this repressive system of obligations and prohibitions has been to generate a widespread hypocrisy on the subject of books that we actually have read. I know few eras of private life, with the exception of finance and sex, in which it's difficult to obtain accurate information. It's really quite hilarious if you think about it that way, how touchy of a subject the books you've read is. And I thought it was lovely, like our teacher even said, he has not read most of the big Russian classics. I mean, he has read Crime and Punishment, but he says he just doesn't enjoy super big books, and he has just skimmed them and he read parts of it. And still he's a professor at university teaching literature. So, I don't know. That was just a little bit like, okay. Ooh, let's go over to my favorite course. As you must know by now, it's about the topic of time and memory in modern literature. And the first big work we had to read for that course was parts of The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann, originally in German, Der Zauberberg. And the things you see marked here is the parts we had to read, and I enjoyed it so much that I decided to get the book myself, and I think Thomas Mann is quickly becoming one of my favorite authors. I just think the way he writes is perfect. So in this book, not only does Mann speak about time in a philosophical way, but also he simulates our experience of time by the way he structures this book, which is just really cool. It gives some fascinating charts we looked at, like this. I'm gonna put it on the screen. in terms of how long he makes which chapters and how that aids our experience that relates to the main character in the book, which is so cool. I love this book. And we've also had to read some excerpts of Josef und seine Brüder, Joseph and His Brothers by Thomas Mann. And again, very much enjoying him. Then we've also read Tertien über die Vergänglichkeit by Hugo von Hofmannsthal. We've read an excerpt from The Waterfalls of Slunj by Heimito von Doderer. We looked at the Wackenroder Lieder, the Wackenroder songs by Richard Wagner, and analyzed the text and talked about where that poetry comes from and with which kind of mentality it was written, and that romantic idea of time standing still. My professor as well wrote 2 really long articles, one on the topic of forgetting in literature, and the other one on the wheel of time, where he draws together many different books and concepts, and really cool. They were a lot of work to read, but I'm really happy that I did. Then we also read Wilhelm Heinrich Wackenroders Ein wunderbares morgenländisches Märchen von einem nackten Heiligen, which is a short story or a fairy tale. In English, it's A Wondrous Oriental Tale of a Naked Saint. And it talks about this, naked saint, so someone who meditates a lot, and he continuously has the wheel of time in his ears, and it drives him crazy that he hears time, and it just doesn't stop. So, which is ironic because he's the one meditating a lot, so it should actually be less for him, but controversially it becomes more. And in the end, music is the only thing that gets him out of that sensation and out of that struggle with time. Very beautiful. Then we read a big excerpt from the Confessions by St. Augustine, the Confessiones, all about time and what God did before he created. And I still have to read that actually, so I cannot say much about it, but from what I peeked into, really important text. I think I've heard about it many times, and I really want to get it as well and read it, but there's so many things I want to read already. But I'm really hoping that when I have to do Latin, that I'm going to be able to maybe translate from the original. That could be fun. Then we also read a bunch of Virginia Woolf texts. So we read excerpts from many of her books. The Hours, Mrs. Dalloway, The Waves, The Years, To the Lighthouse, Orlando, and we read a few of her diary excerpts. Really lovely. She did a lot with time, so super cool to get into her in that way. So Virginia Woolf is mentioned a lot. I think she's one of the authors that is mentioned the most in basically all of my courses, so it's lovely to get a little overview of her work here as well. Here is a quote from The Waves. The sun had not yet risen. The sea was indistinguishable from the sky, except that the sea was slightly creased, as if a cloth had wrinkles in it. Gradually, as the sky widened, a dark line lay on the horizon, dividing the sea from the sky, and the grey cloth became buried, with thick strokes moving, one after another, beneath the surface, following each other, pursuing each other, perpetually. So someone was asking for a reading list from this course, so I hope this gives you a little bit of insight into what it is we're reading. I know there's going to be Proust still coming up. There's going to be 1 or 2 dedicated lectures just to Proust. I'm so looking forward to that. I told my professor how much I love Proust, and he was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry that we don't have like in-depth seminars about him at the moment." And I'm like, "In-depth seminars about Proust?" So I think I'm gonna have to go back and like squeeze my professor for some more information. But yeah, much looking forward to that. What's also still coming up is James Joyce's Ulysses. We're gonna talk about Plato, apparently, Stephen King, The Shining. What else? More from Doderer, Die Strudelhofstiege, Twardog and Faulkner, Galsworthy and Povell, Mitchell, Grass, Johnson, Opperman, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Cortázar, Butor, Borges, and Vladimir Nabokov, specifically Ada and Pale Fire. So yeah, excited for what's still to come in this course. All right, let's go from the very high to the very low. My next course is called Literature Research, and I honestly don't really know what I have to read for that course. I'm mostly learning about how to write scientific papers, how to do research, how to quote correctly, and how to, address all genders and things like that. But yeah, it's, as you might see by my lack of enthusiasm, my least favorite course. It's just a bit dry and boring to me. And I just hope that by sitting in class I soak up what I need. There's one like manual on our platform that I think we should read, which is called Handbuch für wissenschaftliches Arbeiten für Theater, Film und Medienwissenschaft. So it's like it's a manual for scientific works from our university. So I guess I have to read that. But other than that, not a lot of reading in this course. We had to do a library tour, which was lovely. But yeah, honestly, I'm a bit confused. So let's embrace that and move on. The one before last course I want to talk about is my introductory course to literature. Let's see what I have to read for that. Okay, so we had to first read an article about writing literary history in the 19th century by Job Leersens. I'm gonna read you a quick quote of that. Okay, so he says, to begin with, the concept of literature became more and more automatically nationalized as well as aestheticized, whereas its original meaning embraced all forms of written culture, including travel description, history writing, criticism, political commentary, and philosophy. The 19th century witnesses a romantic narrowing of the term towards those genres and discourses which are primarily aesthetic or artistic and driven by the power of the imagination. Then another text by Albert Meyer about Literaturgeschichtsschreibung, so same topic. Then we read Maus by Art Spiegelman. I mentioned that in my last video. We didn't have to read all of it, but parts, and we read it mostly because of the fact that it, bended and broke the comic genre quite a bit. Because up until the point that Art Spiegelman wrote Maus, comics were mostly for children, and they were supposed to be funny. And then he suddenly came and talked about these serious topics of war in comic form, and how there is a certain kind of like unwritten pact between reader and writer about what you expect from a certain genre, and how he intentionally or not played with that. Yeah, it was the same with the Snow White fairy tale that Slavomir Momrosek rewrote into like a funny, ironic version. yeah, and how that also, like, then again didn't fit into the genre of fairy tales. Then we had to read the introduction of What is Literature by Eagleton. That was about 16 pages. Couple of articles about books and their genres and not knowing which genre they were or where to put them in the bookstore. And then the last thing I haven't read yet, but have to prepare for... Oh no, I did read that. Well, for next class is called Frauenliteratur by Nicole Seifert, so women in literature. And yeah, I think it's a text to prepare us for the discussion around literary canons and how they're made and who's included and who's excluded and why and all the problems with it. And I think it also fits in pretty well with the topic on, you know, women in literature in general, which I talked about with Virginia Woolf, about how, you know, we always have to ask ourselves who had the means to even write or read in terms of time, money, status, and those things, and how that shaped the canon and what we're reading today and things like that. So I think this is the last one. Yes. Okay. Let's go to the last course I'm taking, which is called Colonial Past and Post-Colonial Present of the Low Countries Reflected in Literature. Such a long name. So it is, as the name says, about how colonialism is reflected in literature. Colonialism of the Low Countries. The Low Countries are the Netherlands and Belgium in this case. And, you know, so it's about Belgian Congo, the Dutch East and West Indies, and things like that. And we mostly just read excerpts of novels that in some way represent how people must have felt in that, you know, specific time period, because there were many stages of colonialization. Jesus. Colonialism. That thing. Yeah, so I'll quickly go through which ones we've had to read. Again, we've mostly had to read excerpts, usually between 10 and 35 or so pages, and then we always talked about that in class and we had to prepare some questions. So the first novel we had to read was by Helle Hase, De Theebarone. Then we had to read an article by Geert Ostenlinde called From Colonial Past to Post-Colonial Present. Another article from Tart about overseas colonialization and the Atlantic revolutions. I'm going to read you a little quote from that so you get an idea. These different colonization models reflected political and military strategy in Europe. Spain pursued dynastic power and empire in Europe. Portugal and the Netherlands mainly wanted to protect their international trading positions. The Great Britain and France were powerful proto-national states. It's quite interesting. I didn't think that I would enjoy this course much because it wouldn't have been my first choice of topic, but I'm actually really enjoying learning about history more. And I think it's the first time in my life that actually really interests me. And it's quite, yeah, it's cool. I mean, it's still not my favorite topic, and I don't think I would pick up any of these books and like read them entirely or something. I feel like it's broadening my horizon quite a bit because my knowledge in history is pretty small, I have to admit. So yeah. Anyways, then we read another novel excerpt from The Hidden Forest by Louis Couperus. Another Helle Hase novel, Oorlog. Yeah, as I've said, I really enjoy reading that in Dutch. and kind of upping my Dutch skills a little bit again. Terwijl ik staarde naar de verblekende gloed boven de horizon, werd ik bevangen door een nog niet eerder bekend gevoel van onbehagen, omdat ik naar school moest, omdat alles anders zou worden. Ik weet niet of ik me dit alles toen zo bewust was. Het kan zijn dat ik nu achteraf een interpretatie zoek voor die stemming van melancholie en vage ergernis. Then we had to read Bezonken Rood van Jeroen Brouwers. That is Sunken Red in the English translation. We also read Marion Bloem, De Leugens van Kakatoe, and another article by Pamela Patiyama about cultural memory and Indo-Dutch identity formations. That's the last little paragraph. So the article starts by saying, in his well-known Culture and Imperialism from 1993, Zeige argued that imperialism and colonialism are constructed not only on the basis of military or economic force, but on culture as well. Culture and politics, he states, produce a system of control that goes beyond military power, as it works through representations and images. And the last article I have to prepare for our next lesson is called On the Cultural Politics of Representing Dutch Moluccans at Barrack 1B in the Netherlands. So yeah, another article of like probably 10 or 12 pages. That's it. That's all I had to read in my first month. It's honestly a lot more than I thought, and I'm pretty surprised that I'm able to keep up so well, because I'm actually quite a slow reader, and even though I always loved reading, I never read a lot. Yeah, but this is it. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, leave them down below. Let me know what you think of these books, if you know them. It would be lovely to have a little bit of a conversation going. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye bye.